I'm Dr. Walt Miner. I'm here to talk about LSD. The reason I'm talking about LSD is that I'm trying to counteract a lot of the popular publicity that you're reading about this material. It's very difficult today to pick up a newspaper or a magazine or listen to the radio without hearing about LSD. A lot of what you read is true, a lot more of it isn't true. You need all the facts. Now, nothing I'm going to say today is going to be emotional. I'm not going to lie to you. I'm going to tell you the facts as we know them, facts that we can document. I'm talking basically to two people. I'm talking to the man who is thinking about taking LSD because I want him to know all that I know about it before he takes it. I'm talking to the rest of you people who go to sea in the Navy because I want you to think about just how much you want to go to sea with people who do take this material. So that we're all talking about the same thing, I'd like to give you some historical background on LSD. What is it? There's a fungus. It's like the mold that grows on bread. Only this fungus grows on wheat and it grows on rye. One of the byproducts of this fungus is a group of chemical compounds called ergot. And ergot is made up of several different chemical constituents, and all of these constituents have a powerful effect on the body. And these effects vary all over the map, from everything from causing an abortion to curing a migraine headache. Now, anytime you have a naturally occurring compound that has powerful physiologic effects, people in the drug industry, drug researchers, will be looking at these molecules. They'll be trying to modify them, to change them, to see if they can change the effects that are produced, to make them safer. They look for a lot of things. In 1938, in Switzerland, two chemists, one by the name of Hoffman, one by the name of Stahl, took an ergot derivative and made some modifications on the molecule. They didn't do very much with it in 1938. In 1943, Dr. Hoffman pulled this compound back out of the drawer and began to work on it, began to characterize it, resynthesized it. Now, this was on a Friday afternoon that he was working in the laboratory making this compound. Late in the afternoon, he began to feel extremely uncomfortable, very anxious, very nervous. He began to hallucinate. It was necessary for him to go home. He'd never done this before, and it frightened him. Over the weekend, he began to think, what possibly could have tripped him out? What could have done this to him? And he decided it could conceivably have been the material that he was making. And this didn't make a great deal of sense, because chemists are a lot like doctors. Neither one of us spend much time putting our fingers in our mouths because of the places our hands have been. So he knew he hadn't ingested or taken into his body any great quantity of this stuff. But perhaps it was the compound. So he calculated what would be a small dose of any of the normal ergot compounds. And then he divided that dose by 10 and decided that on Monday he would take this dose by mouth of this new compound and see what happened. So Monday he went into the laboratory and took 250 micrograms of the compound that he had made. The compound that he had made was the first lysergic acid diethylamide, LSD. 250 micrograms is a microscopic dose of any ergot compound we know of, but it turns out to be a huge dose of LSD. That Monday, Hoffman took the first intentional LSD trip. It terrified him. He was essentially psychotic for a period of 24 hours. From 1943 until the late 1950s, this material stayed essentially in the laboratory. We had time to begin to characterize the material, to begin to look for uses for it. It was a powerful drug. People wanted to know what they could do with it. In this length of time, we found out many things about the drug. Everything that we found out about LSD is almost unique to anything that we know in medicine. First and foremost, and perhaps the most unique thing about LSD, is the effective dose of the material. The dose of LSD is 0.5 to 1 micrograms per kilogram of body weight. A microgram is an unreasonable number to visualize. It's just too small to make sense to anyone. I've tried a couple of ways to make a microgram make sense. One way is here. I have a piece of wax paper. On that piece of wax paper, I've made a mark with a pen. It's wax paper so the ink doesn't absorb. And I show you a penny beside this mark so that you can see the size. The ink in that mark weighs some micrograms. Now, perhaps even more impressive, I have a tube of human blood. And I take one standard drop of that blood. One drop of human blood. That drop of blood contains $330 million cells. The weight of LSD necessary to produce the effect is the same as the weight of 2 red blood cells. One of the problems in drug research is to find an experimental animal that you can try a new drug out on. It's nice to be able to work with animals when you're doing toxicity studies and effect studies. And this can be quite a problem. It's very difficult, generally, to find an animal that any given drug will give you a demonstrable effect on. Well, here again, LSD tends to be unique. We have never given LSD to a living creature that it hasn't affected. It affects fish, it affects spiders, it affects rabbits and dogs and cats, and perhaps most interesting of all, for one reason or another, LSD was given to an elephant once. And lo and behold, it killed the elephant, much to the surprise of the zoo. I'm not sure what you do with a dead elephant. Another thing that's unique about LSD, it doesn't seem to make much difference how you take it. You can take it by most any route you can think of, in a tablet, in a pill, on a sugar cube, in a liquid. Most drugs don't act this way. They have a critically specific route of administration. Now, for any drug, there's what we call a latent period, and that's the length of time between giving the drug and seeing the effect of the drug. And this latent period is dose route specific. If you give a drug by mouth, it's going to take longer to get the effect than if you give it by vein. Lo and behold, with LSD, it doesn't make a doggone bit of difference how you give it. You take it by mouth, you pump it directly into a vein. The latent period is the same. It's still going to take about an hour to get the effect. We've looked for LSD. We've looked to see where it goes. Where does it act? How does it work in the body? We've taken LSD and we've attached a radioactive substance to it, a carbon-14 atom, to the LSD molecule. We've given it to people and we've tried to count it and track it through the body to see where it goes. And this, again, is unique. LSD is absorbed almost instantly from the intestinal tract. It cycles through the brain very, very rapidly. The half-life of the compound in the body is about 7 minutes. Lo and behold, by the time you get symptoms from LSD, the LSD itself is gone, long gone. And I think this suggests to us how LSD probably acts. This is extremely important because it probably explains the problems and the side effects that we see with this material. It is extremely important to realize that the LSD itself does not produce the effect. What appears to happen is that in the brain there are certain chemical reactions which are possible but which do not take place. We have reactions that are cocked, as it were, like a gun, ready to go off, but they can't ordinarily. Along comes the LSD and it acts as a catalyst. It allows these otherwise impossible reactions to occur. And there they go. It takes a minute quantity to catalyze the reaction. Once the reaction is underway, it can continue. Back up just for a moment to answer a question that I'm constantly asked. Does LSD have any taste? Well, from what I've already told you about the dose and the route of administration, there really is no answer to that question. If you have enough LSD presented to you to be able to taste it anyway, you have 100 to 1,000 times more than you need to get the effect. Now, what are the effects of LSD on a person? Now, we've got to divide these into physical effects and mental effects. And the physical effects are clear-cut and they're reproducible. They are the same. I can tell you just about what's going to happen to your pulse and your respiration and your blood pressure and your eyeballs and everything else if you take LSD, but these aren't the important effects. The important effects are the mental effects. Now, to some extent, the mental effects of LSD depend on what's called the set and the setting. The set is what you expect to happen. It's how you feel at the moment, what you're thinking, whether you're nervous, whether you're worried, what you anticipate with the compound. The setting is just as it sounds. It's where you take it, the situation, the things surrounding you, the environment. What does happen when you take LSD? Within about 20 minutes, you will have some physical effects. And these are not particularly comfortable, but neither are they particularly uncomfortable. The heart beats a little faster, you breathe a little faster, you may feel a bit anxious. Within another 20 minutes, roughly, you will develop the mental effects. Now, these are the important ones. There is a rapid, very complete loss of contact with reality. There is a rapid loss of the body image. You may very well hear things that aren't there. You will certainly hear things that are there and hear them differently. You may see things that aren't there, but you will certainly see things that are there differently. There's a change in the size and the shape and the proportion and the colors of things that you are seeing ordinarily. And these changes themselves change rapidly and are highly colored, brilliantly colored. The loss of the body image means that it's very difficult for you to tell where you stop and the chair starts. It makes it equally difficult to tell if your thoughts are your own or belong to someone else. Are you thinking something or is the bulkhead thinking something? There's a loss of the body's sense of time. Now, ordinarily, we can sit and without a watch, we can count off 15 seconds or a minute and we can be pretty close. On LSD, the body's natural clock just ceases to function. Time may be tremendously stretched or tremendously shrunken. Seconds may take hours, and hours may take seconds. This is one of the reasons it's extremely dangerous for someone under the effects of LSD to drive an automobile. Now, these mental effects to the confirmed LSD user, to the evangelist, if you will, are felt to be religious and beautiful and godlike, perhaps because they expect them to be. Realistically speaking, they are nothing more nor less than a period of insanity. It's the only applicable word. Let's talk some more about these mental effects. Let me graph them for you, try to show you when they happen and how they happen. And we'll start talking about some side effects and some problems that we see with this material now. If we graph effects versus time, with effects on this axis and time down here, we take the drug at time 0. These are hours. During the first hour is the onset of the mental effects. These effects will become more pronounced. They will increase until they reach a peak in about 6 hours. They will then gradually taper off for a total trip, if you will, of about 20 hours. After which we have another 48-hour period that corresponds very much to a hangover. Now, this is not a hangover of the kind with which you perhaps have had some experience. This is a mental rather than a physical hangover. This is a feeling, a period, a time of depression, feeling very, very badly, very low, very depressed, very bad with the world. So we're talking about a total trip here of about 72 hours. It would just fit into a weekend pass. Now, is this 72-hour trip any worse than a good, solid binge? And the answer is yes, it's a whole heck of a lot worse. One of the reasons is that alcohol is self-limiting. If you'll be honest with yourselves, if you start drinking and if you continue to drink steadily, you will, within a period of time, cease to function. If you continue to drink long enough, you will become horizontal and you will stop. With LSD, this doesn't happen. Unfortunately, the man who is psychotic on LSD can continue to function. He continues to do things. Worst of all, perhaps, he continues to do things and feel that he is doing them extremely well. Now, this is dangerous. What are some more of the dangerous effects of this material? What do you have to know if you're thinking about taking it? First and foremost, perhaps, and maybe the one that you've read the most about, is that some people, and I can't tell you if I'm talking about 1 out of 10 or 1 out of 100 or 1 out of 100,000, but some people will reach the peak of these mental effects right here, and they will stay there. From here on out, these people are insane. They are psychotic. Now, what other immediate problems do we have with this material? This time period in here is extremely dangerous. If someone gives you this material and you don't know you're getting it, the time in which these mental symptoms are beginning and increasing is terrifying. If we take a man who knows he's getting LSD, perhaps he's had many trips and they've been pleasant, and yet in the rising phase of the mental effects, you put him under a little stress. And it doesn't take very much stress. It takes such a little stress that it may be that the lights are too bright, that the music on the phonograph isn't quite right, that there's a little noise outside, something. Any stress in this rising phase will trip this man into a bad trip. He will have the same effect as the man who is given the material and doesn't know he's getting it. He will be terrified. He's not seeing pretty visions, he's seeing monsters. He's losing his mind and he feels it going. He is intensely, extremely, terribly uncomfortable. If he is alone, if it's possible for him, there's only one escape from this discomfort. That's suicide. This man will kill himself if he has the opportunity to do so. If this man who trips into a bad trip in this phase is with a guide, and you're always supposed to take this with a guide, he trips into a bad trip, he becomes paranoid. He immediately blames this intense mental discomfort on the only person that's there to blame it on, the guide. If he can, he'll kill the guide. Now, I'm not talking about rare occurrences. I personally know of 2 attempted and 1 successful murders that have occurred right in here for that reason. Now, in this stage, during the peak of the mental effects, we again get deaths. And these are accidental deaths. I can't emphasize strongly enough how complete this depersonalization, this loss of body image, this omnipotent, godlike, omniscient feeling is that these people get. People in this phase of the mental symptoms frequently kill themselves. No intention of doing it at all, but they do. Many people, and I'm beginning to think that most people, certainly all of the users that I've interviewed at any length, have admitted that in this period of the mental effects, they have felt that they could fly. Now, a user that feels strongly that he can fly and who goes out the first floor window is not in too much trouble. But if he's on the 7th deck, he's not going to make it. The flight is going to be brief. The end is consistently the same. There are probably a fair number of people in the United States bailing out of windows that they had no intention to bail out of. There's a well-documented case on the West Coast. A youngster took this material, godlike in his power, walked into the middle of the expressway and put out his hands to stop the cars, and they killed him. There's a young lady on the coast who, in this phase of an LSD trip, decided to walk across Oakland Bay, and she drowned. It's been 2,000 years since anybody has successfully walked on water. A certain number of people in this phase are going to have a convulsion, like an epileptic convulsion. Now, this is particularly dangerous if you happen to be driving a car at the time. Now, who's going to have troubles here and who isn't? There is no way to answer that question. The mental effects of this material are tremendously variable. They are completely unpredictable. You cannot tell what individual is going to have problems. You cannot tell for any given individual if he's going to have a good trip or a bad trip. Now, the popular magazines would like us to believe that the people who become psychotic, who become insane when they take this material, are people who are going to become insane anyway. Now, I'm not going to debate that point. The figures are pretty clear-cut on this subject. In the United States right now, in the population between the ages of 20 and 50, 1 person in 10 is going to become mentally ill. So maybe these people that trip out permanently on LSD are those 1 in 10. Okay. I can give you much, much, much better figures than that. In that same population between the age of 20 and 50, 100% of those people are going to die. Every single one of them. But why do it tomorrow? Now, maybe I'm one of these people who, in fact, is going to become insane somewhere between the age of 20 and 50. But maybe I was going to wait until I was 49 to do it. Now, I'd prefer to wait. I see no reason to rush it. I see no reason to take my LSD today and become insane today. I like it around here. We've still been talking about immediate effects, effects that we're going to see within 1, 2, or 3 days of taking this drug. The effects that bother us, the effects that just scare the devil out of me, are not these, they're the late effects. Now, first of all, there's judgment. There's just no question that taking LSD changes your judgment. It changes your discrimination. It changes your ambition, your goal striving. It changes the way you think. It changes your brain. And I'm not talking about a change that lasts a few hours or a few days. I'm talking about a change that we know lasts months. The chief of the department of medicine at Harvard University Medical School says that no man who has taken even 1 dose of LSD should make a major decision for at least 3 months. The only disagreement I have with that statement is that I think we should double that time. I think 6 months, maybe. We know that someone who takes LSD has brain damage. We know that this drug damages the brain. We can see this on brainwave tracings, electroencephalograms. We know that the brain is different. It's difficult to demonstrate how different. And we haven't gotten enough brains in bottles from acid heads yet to dissect them to see where this damage is. But we can demonstrate electrically that the brain is different. A terribly frightening thing about LSD, and this is new, we don't fully understand it. We've just begun to realize it. Is that if you put some blood in a bottle, and you put a little LSD in that bottle, and you let the blood cells grow, and you go back and look at them a little later, the chromosomes, the genes, those parts of our cells which determine what we are going to be, have shattered. The only thing that we know of that gives you the same effect on the genes, actually 2 things. One is a large dose of whole body radiation, and the other is the disease leukemia. Now, if in fact these shattered genes are a permanent change, and we don't know that yet, but in the other 2 cases it is permanent, we must assume that that person who has taken the LSD, and we can demonstrate these shattered genes in LSD takers, has become genetically different. He has mutated, and we must assume that he will produce abnormal progeny, that he will have abnormal kids. It is a very, very frightening thought that carried perhaps to its extreme, that a 16-year-old high school girl could take LSD for kicks and find out that for the rest of her life she can never have a normal child. We don't know what sort of abnormalities to expect. We have no idea. But abnormal genes are going to produce abnormal kids. Now, from the Navy's point of view, there is one unique thing about LSD that is perhaps most important to us from the standpoint of operations and survival. With LSD, it's possible, after even one dose, that at any time, with no warning, no way to predict when it's going to happen, you can have a full, complete, full-intensity recurrence of all the LSD symptoms without taking any more LSD. We know nothing else that acts in any way, shape, or form like this. There may be somebody in the Navy who once upon a time, perhaps, drank a little bit more than he should have one time. But I can guarantee to you that if you take that man to sea with you, once he's sober, that after he's been at sea for 5 or 6 weeks and has had no more alcohol, he is not suddenly going to come down drunk. Any man who has ever taken LSD can at any time suddenly develop a recurrence. Now, what's any time? Am I talking about days or weeks? No. I'm talking about months. The longest recurrence that I can document is 2 years after taking LSD. These recurrences can come on with no warning. They can be triggered by many, many things. They can be triggered by lights, colored lights, flashing lights, the kind of lights that we tend to have on a lot of our panels. They can be triggered by sensory deprivation. That's a nice long word, and it simply means being in a position where you can't see the outside, you can't feel the wind, you can't hear the birds. You're in a stable, fixed, quiet, even-temperatured environment. I'm describing a ship. I'm describing a submarine. I'm describing the interior compartments of most any ship. I'm talking about colored lights and thinking about the control panels in airplanes. Now, we know of civilian recurrences. We know of lots of them. We know of the lady who was driving an automobile down the expressway and suddenly the car in front of her ballooned up to 100 times as big as it ought to be. And she knew that she could never drive around this huge automobile. And she went into a complete panic and stopped and ran off into a store. We know of another lady who was driving on the Los Angeles freeway 6 months after having taken LSD and suddenly depersonalized, suddenly lost her body image, suddenly split into 2 people and had no idea which of the 2 people was driving. And she almost ran off a bridge, and that lady's still insane and she's still in a hospital. This is the dangerous part from our point of view. Ever since the Navy began, ever since we had our first ship, the whole basis of the Navy has been that the men were reliable. We got a lot of people in the Navy. We're all different kinds and all different shapes and all different sizes, but the one thing we've got to be is reliable. You've got to be able to depend on your men. Basically, we're interested in keeping the ocean out of the inside of our ships. We're interested in keeping our airplanes up in the air. A man who takes LSD, a man who has taken LSD, cannot be considered reliable. In any situation, at any time, unexpectedly, he can become insane on you. This is not the kind of man that we want to go to sea with us. The boss of the Pure Food and Drug Administration in Washington is a man named Dr. Goddard. And he describes LSD about as well as I've heard it described. He calls it Russian roulette with a sugar cube. It's a good description. Now, this stuff scares me to death. I have no intention whatsoever of risking my career, my judgment, my ambition, my kids, and my sanity so that I can sit for 12 or 15 hours and watch pretty colored lights behind my eyeballs. I would like you to think about what I've said, decide if the risk is worth it.